Welcome to the Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back, and I hope your day is off to a great start. We are excited to have another just talented and engaging peer. But before we jump right into that, here at Perusing's, the Power Values podcast, want to just encourage you and remind you, one quick action, like the podcast. Second quick action, bonus action for those of you who like bonus points. Who's one person that you'd love to share this with that could also get some insight, some appreciation, maybe some education, or just a little spark to action for the benefit of spending a little time here in this conversation we're going to have today with Jim Glickman. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Glad to be here.
I appreciate it. Well, Jim, our opening question. So were you born this way, or how did your life intersect the valuation and appraisal profession?
Unbeknownst to me, I was born this way, but I tried to avoid it.
I love that.
Yeah, no, my dad was in real estate.
Okay.
Not always, but eventually he was in real estate. But as early as I can remember, real estate sales, he's a realtor and an appraiser.
Okay.
I mean, heck, I can remember when I was a young kid, I would go out to open houses with my dad, set up for either it was a new home subdivision or just an individual house, and go out on the weekend and help him set up. Sometimes we'd clean the houses, or we'd freshen up the landscaping or whatever it took, put up the signs. So, yeah, when I would get deposed by attorneys, they asked me, how long have you been in real estate? And I'd say since I'm about 10. That would be when they're trying to qualify you as an expert. And the opposing attorney would just say, never mind. Okay, we accept him. Because they knew where it was going. So, but yeah, no, originally my interests were in the arts. And I went to college at the University of Missouri, Columbia, where the Mizzou Tigers are, not far from where you are.
Yeah, that's true.
Far from me in California right now. But yeah, started out as an art major. And then one of our friends, my roommate was an art major too, and somebody suggested going into interior design.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, hey, it's kind of a mix of art and architecture.
Mm-hmm.
So went in that direction, got a degree, learned how to draw plans, learned about orientation. Back then it was passive solar. They didn't actually have solar, but they had passive solar, and learned about that. And so I could draw. I learned drafting, and so I was good with a set of plans. Understood buildings, homes, and actually took an internship in interior design residential. So if anybody has the opportunity to have an internship, I would advise them to do it, because after taking the internship, I realized I don't want to be a residential interior designer, because I don't want to have to go, just like in sales or whatever, it's subjective.
Yes.
Having to adjust to people's personal tastes, things of that type. So I knew, no, not for me. I switched to commercial design, offices, that type of thing, businesses. Did graduate, got a job with a local, where I went to college, a local office furniture sales place, but they also offered design. So got the opportunity to work on the design of offices and stores and commercial buildings like that. So it was all kind of all relative. Back then, the big thing was open offices with cubicles. That was new back then. Herman Miller and Steelcase, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And again, learned a lot about design and space utilization, and I guess what now I think of as functional utility. It all translated well. Unfortunately, similar to recent times, there was a recession in the 70s. Things all of a sudden started tightening up. Interest rates started going up. Inflation was high. And there was no business expansion. Nobody was buying office furniture. Nobody wanted to get their business designed. I saw that as things are not going in the right direction. So with my tail between my legs, I headed back to St. Louis, where I grew up, and started work for my dad in 1977.
Oh, really?
Yeah, by that time, he had his own firm. He had worked for another real estate firm, but by then he had his own firm. It was Les Glickman Incorporated, realtors and appraisers. So he did both, wore both hats. He was the only appraiser at the time. He had about 10 agents.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that was my start in real estate.
Wow.
I did sales and brokerage,
Okay.
and I did appraising.
Wow.
But I kind of started getting the feeling that sales was not my niche.
Mm.
I did more analysis and helped people
Yep.
make decisions, talked more people out of buying property than I sold.
Which, in one sense, that builds a lot of goodwill, but not a lot of green for the pocket.
No, and they just turn around and go back and go look, get another agent and buy the property.
Oh, no, goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So, so I knew that wasn't for me. I stuck with the appraising. I did a lot of interesting assignments. Actually, back then, no licensing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, back then.
Yeah. So no licensing. So basically, I just got a card that said I was an appraiser. So I did a lot of interesting assignments with my dad. Actually, one of my first ones, it's like, jump right into the fire, was a major eminent domain case involving a proposed industrial park. So it was like, I don't know, maybe about 100-acre parcel. And they were building what they called the inner belt, which connected back then old U.S. Highway 40 to Interstate 70, and it was going to end up at the airport. So this was called the inner belt, which I think is now called I-170 or something. That really, I cut my teeth on a major condemnation case.
Wow.
Learned a lot. Like any appraisers, you got to start taking classes as well.
Yes.
So I took my first appraisal class at a community college, and the guy that taught it, his name was Preston Bank. He wasn't a bank. His name was Preston, and his last name was Bank.
It's a good name.
Yeah.
It's a good name.
And that'll be relevant later because so that was my first connection with Preston. He was my first instructor. Took a lot of classes. Started taking Appraisal Institute classes, became a candidate. I say about 2 years of working with my dad. Mm-hmm. We were out to dinner one night, and my dad was great. He was. I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute.
Yeah, sure.
We went out to dinner one night, and we were standing outside the office. Standing there looking at the office, looked at the sign over the door, and he turned to me and said, "Son, someday this is all going to be yours." And I turned to him and I said, "Dad, I don't want it."
Oh, wow.
I said, because I don't want to babysit 10 agents and be up all night, phone calls, working all at weekends. And I said, this is just not what I want, particularly the babysitting and being the broker. I could see that. Shortly thereafter, probably within the next year, my dad's firm was purchased by one of the larger real estate companies in St. Louis. And then he and I went with a package and our agents. I continued to work as an appraiser there. He was made some type of vice president.
Sure.
Ended up wearing all kinds of hats. But eventually I left. Didn't like working for the corporation. Ended up actually getting a job with Preston Bank, my old instructor.
Oh, really? Old instructor, sure.
Yeah. So ended up working for Preston and worked there. I think I probably joined him at 79 until about 1983. Did all kinds of work.
Okay.
Developed an expertise in apartments along with other things. And that was a great experience. He was a great mentor as well. And my dad was, to say the least, was a great mentor as well. I had mentioned before I go on to my next chapter in life.
Yes.
Is that, my dad was a very strong proponent of education. And he was always heavily involved in professional organizations.
Oh,
so
okay.
He was, involved with the realtors. And back then, the appraisal, there was an appraisal organization known as the NAIFA, National Association of Independent Fee Appraisers. I think they've since merged with ASA, but they had a local presence, as did the Appraisal Institute as well. But kind of the easier way into getting those initials behind your name is I ended up getting the NA or IFA designation. Still taking classes, became a candidate for the Institute, but continued to be, as my dad was, I became involved in some of the organizations at that time. Going back to my dad, he went through the chairs. He was on the board of directors. He became the president of the St. Louis Association of Realtors. He was the president of the Missouri Association of Realtors and even the president of the local chapter of the NAIFA. So, and all along, he's always teaching classes, doing seminars, dinner speaking, speeches, that type of thing. So I'd say he obviously had a big impact on my life, and I tend to do the same thing. I've followed that path. I guess all I can say is if I were to advise anybody, if you're going to be in the profession, if you're going to treat it as a profession, give back to the profession, but get involved. Get involved in your local chapters or even the state or national, whatever we want to do, because you can develop some great relationships, meet some really outstanding people, and it's good for business.
It really is.
Yeah.
People do business with people that they know and they like and they trust.
Exactly. And as you know, this is a business of referrals. I mean, I know we have you know best than anybody, social media and all that, but frankly, you tell me, do you get more referrals out of social media, or do you get more referrals from the people you've done work with or know of your work?
Yeah, it's a fascinating statement and actually inquiry. And a lot of it comes down to, I was just meeting with Brian, who's a mortgage broker, been at it for like 30 some years. And as he pointed out, he does essentially no marketing to try and find new people, because his whole responsibility is just staying in touch with everyone he's worked with over 30 years. But that's 30 years into it. Now, most people are not as diligent. And I've met a number of appraisers who are, to your point, Jim, but most are not as diligent about staying in touch with all the past clients. And therefore, it definitely feels like you're always out there on the hamster wheel trying to find new business. So social media is one way to make up for lost time.
Okay, good point. Yeah. And I never relied on it, although you found me through LinkedIn. So
yeah, the power of social media,
Yeah. And I don't even push it out there. I don't post anything.
Nope.
I'm just that guy out there, working out there, watching what everybody else is doing.
That's most of the people on social media, is just paying attention. Speaking of paying attention, how did the conversations go early on with you and your dad? When, not so much when you came back, obviously, in one sense, it was like starting newly at the firm with dad. But in one sense, it was also a reunification of back in the day, cleaning out homes and preparing the open houses. How did your exposure around real estate differ once you had committed to becoming an appraiser in the firm, as opposed to what you'd been exposed to growing up?
Really, it wasn't a lot different, other than we weren't living under the same roof anymore. But we were working together day by day.
Mm-hmm.
He was a good mentor, but back in the day, it was like, I'd be handed an appraisal report. So here's an example of how to do one of these.
Yes.
Now go do it.
Yes.
Was kind of how you learned. And of course, there was guidance along the way. But I think a lot of what I learned was just looking at examples of appraisals done by other appraisers.
Yes.
And, not copying it, but trying to, replicate what they did.
Yes.
And of course, I'm taking classes all the time. So education is important.
What changed when you from the standpoint of you having a report to model your valuation for a property, taking classes again, and then now the firm changes hands? And as you pointed out, it was a different group, it's a different culture, different approach. Was there much more learning with the new firm, or was it more just being in the production side, just getting work done?
The firm I joined really had no established appraisal practices, anything of that sort. So that was kind of new for them. And so we had the liberty of just basically doing the appraisals as, in the format and how we felt was correct. They trusted us in that regard. However, they were trying to direct certain jobs and clients to us. And because they were mainly a brokerage business.
Oh, I see.
What was the most difficult part about it was teaching them to understand conflict of interest.
Well, it's hard for some people to get a handle on.
Yeah, they just wanted more income, and they thought acquiring us not only bring in some good agents, but also expand into appraisal and consulting. So I think that's a little bit of why I left. It was just that they didn't really understand or care about some of the conflicts of interest that occurred. And it's difficult. I know there are a lot of appraisers out there that are able to wear both hats, brokerage and appraising. It's not an easy thing to do.
It's a very very difficult one, and one that a lot of people, they just don't know anything about it. And why would they? Because they don't have to study the professional practices. And there's like, I just need this and get it done. And they assume it's like other professions they've been in where there's a lot of advocates. Yeah. This just happens to be one where there is advocacy, but it's not the way they're thinking of it.
Right. And again, that was common sense. And before there was licensing.
Yes, before there was licensing. Yeah. How did that change when you had the opportunity to step in, to go to the bank with Mr. Preston Bank and join the firm there?
He was a great guy. Very approachable.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really, I was fortunate to have a mentor like him, just like my father, that had the faith in me and took the time to spend time with me to help me develop my craft. Like I said, he was a teacher, and we made a good team. We worked 5 days a week, and we both come in on Saturdays and do whatever you could on a Saturday morning and have lunch, and then we were on our way. So we spent a lot of time together. So he's a great guy. It was kind of difficult to leave when I did finally decide to leave.
Oh, wow. What prompted you to leave a good working environment?
Well, I guess one, I was in St. Louis, and I looked around, and I love St. Louis. I love my friends. I love my family.
Yes.
But I could see where my life was headed, and you could almost see, who am I going to marry, and et cetera, et cetera. And both the social setting and the business setting there. And it wasn't attractive to me long term.
I got it.
I was open to a change. About that same time, I visited a friend who lived in California. I'd actually visited him in 1981.
Okay.
Cupertino.
Yep.
And then in Silicon Valley, and then he moved to Sacramento, and I visited him in the summer of '83 and spent 2 weeks in Sacramento area and Lake Tahoe and San Francisco and all that. Looked around, but the end of the trip, I started to realize that Sacramento was an area ripe for growth, if you will.
Yes.
And it was attractive. It had that Midwest feel to it.
Oh, really? Okay.
There were rivers. State capital was there, from Missouri.
Yes.
Missouri River, where I went to college, was in the center of the state. The state capital was close by, and it was kind of reminiscent of kind of a California version.
Oh, wow.
Of mid-Missouri to me. It was green. There were rivers. Of course, Missouri, have mountains in the background, but it was really a beautiful area. And so I decided to look for a job in Sacramento, and I put an ad in back then, and it was in paper, local.
Oh, a paper ad. We
newsletter.
The classified section, the little news section kind of stuff.
Yeah. So they had a local chapter of the Appraisal Institute. I put a little ad in their newsletter, and I just said, candidate looking to relocate.
Oh, okay.
Got a few inquiries, came back in September, and spoke with, half a dozen people. One of them was one of the larger appraisal firms in town, Clark Wilcox Company. I interviewed with them, spoke with them. Unfortunately, they had just filled their open position.
Oh, okay.
So my timing was not good. But I was fortunate enough to interview with the manager of the regional office for a San Diego-based savings and loan, Home Federal Savings and Loan.
Okay.
So they had a local presence as far as an regional appraisal office.
Yes.
And so I was fortunate they offered me a job, got a position as, I think at the time was kind of a senior appraiser position.
Yes.
And moved to Sacramento in December of that year. I had to wrap up my business, as you can imagine.
Oh, wow.
Had to finish up everything, and pack up and move. And literally that was 40 years ago this week.
Wow, 40 years ago, as we talked about an anniversary week. This is a good timing for the podcast. Wow.
Yeah. So, that was moved here.
Yes.
The office for Home Federal, it ultimately became Home Fed Bank when the banking laws changed.
Yeah.
But that was run by a guy by the name of Greg Harding. He was very gracious. He was very dedicated to appraising. He was an appraiser, or still is. And back then, you had an appraisal department that actually had a staff of appraisers.
Yes.
And they supported you and they trained you.
Yes.
Nowadays, unfortunately, I think reviewers, they get the tough ones at banks.
Yeah.
But they're reviewing the work of others. Sometimes they'll do the more complex appraisals, but they really don't have a lot of staff that actually does appraisals. So when I joined there, not only did I help train some of the younger appraisers, even though I was fairly young at the time, I was only 29, but I helped train some of the newer appraisers coming up. We had interns, student interns, that type of thing.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. We were also kind of in the same space as the lending division, although we were separated. So you were exposed to a little bit more of the lending side of things as well. But they did a fairly good job of separating the two, but developed expertise. Originally, I was brought on for apartments because, as I mentioned, I developed that. So
that was your focus. I mean, that's what you'd specialized in St. Louis,
right,
being around apartments.
Yeah. And a lot of their emphasis was lending on apartments. Ultimately, with the change in the banking laws, they became joint venture partners in the construction and development.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and that allowed me to actually travel not only across California,
Yes.
but I went all over the country looking at new projects, and I did kind of a site selection feasibility study.
Nice.
I would make recommendations as to whether this was a good fit or not. Of course, I would do an appraisal, but there was, I think, more feasibility put into some of those reports than just the value of the site. But I learned a lot more. I learned a lot about purchasing, not just working on purchases, but refinancing, construction, acquisition and development type activities. So I learned a lot about that and kind of the decision process for all of those things. Didn't necessarily work closely with the developers, but obviously had a lot of contact with builders and developers, property owners that were pretty savvy. So definitely learned a lot doing that. Worked on, major office, retail, industrial, apartment, lodging properties. And they also had a very good presence in new home construction and from the ground up.
Oh, fascinating. You get that ground up experience. A lot of people do not get that opportunity.
Yeah. And there was one guy down in San Diego that had developed a, back then, pretty rudimentary computer program that literally followed the money through the development process. And they used that for underwriting, but it was a really good evaluation tool. I mean, it's pretty much a residual analysis of the development method, but a lot more went into it. So learned a lot when I was there. It's quite an incredible experience.
Which, given that you got exposure both nationally and to so many property types, where everyone tends to, maybe you did as well, have some assets or asset types you were, enjoyed or found more fascinating to work on, and others not so much. How did that shake out for you, Jim?
The lodging facilities was intriguing. It was more of a business.
Yes.
So that was something different. But I think the land development, particularly the residential land development, was something that I really got interested in and became a student of. And even to this day, I'm active in it, trying to impart my knowledge to the appraisers on my staff so they understand it from a builder's perspective or land developer's perspective.
Yes.
I mean, frankly, they are, the players in that market. So, trying to help people understand how they view it, value property, is just not a bunch of comps. There's a lot of other decisions that need to be made. It's more, a little bit understanding marketing, but also having a deep understanding of the entitlement process and the development process and all the obstacles to that can impact value. So, I think land development, land valuation is probably the most difficult thing. Give me a building any day.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that.
Because, I used to say land appraisals just give you brain damage. It's not easy.
It takes, when we talk about primary versus secondary, to do it well, the skill set's the skill set. And it's really about that primary research, talking to people, gaining an understanding, not only of the transactions, but also the motivations, and then, coming to supportable conclusions. Especially at the time you were doing this, there was not a lot of readily available information to help accomplish that. I mean, that was Asphalt University right there.
Yeah, which was great. But that kind of goes to if you don't have good investigative skills,
yes,
and you don't have that curious mind, it's going to be tough to be an appraiser. I mean, you can be one, but to be a good one and really, figure out the answer to that puzzle, it takes that. But it is a lot of fun. I love being, like I said, boots on the ground.
Yes.
I still go out and drive, even though I'm in a managed position today. I get in the car and go drive projects, get out and walk around, talk to superintendents, find out what's going on out there. I just love it. It's something I really miss that we don't do. I guess you don't have to anymore with the internet and everything, all the resources on the internet.
Yes.
I remember back in the days, if I needed comps, I'd go in the local assessor's office, open up the assessment book, and back in St. Louis, they'd have notes on the most recent sale in the book. And you just take notes off of the book or go in and actually talk to planners, stand at the counter, wait in line. And going down to the planning office was an hour, took hours.
Yes.
Now, click of a button, and gee, if I can't find the entitlement package in the agenda in 5 minutes, I'm getting frustrated. It's a lot different, but I think going in and talking to people, boots on the ground kind of stuff, you really learn. That's the really way to learn.
Jim, that you summed it up. I remember early on, obviously my background was in a number of different industries before I got into appraisal. And then when I got in, started in residential because that's mostly where I invested. And then actually, much like your experience with Preston Bank, it was an instructor who had reached out to me and wanted me to bring my business over and join his and expand across the Chicago metropolitan area. It didn't actually come to pass, but we stayed good friends, and I stayed a mentor, and he's the one who kept pushing me to get into commercial. And to your point, I worked regularly with his senior commercial appraiser, and that was his forte. He happened to cut his teeth in New York and in hospitality specifically. So he understood the importance of communicating with people and really relating to people. And he could get information out of individuals like you would swear it's just not available. And even if it was, you couldn't get it. And he just, he was magical in that sense. And I remember any number of times where there'd be regional assignments, and we'd either drive or hop on a plane, depending on where they were at. And he would map out the first half of every day. We were going to brokerage offices and we were going to local assessors because these were smaller areas. He's like, Michael, you just don't know this. He said, but I say it as, I just don't know what they know that maybe they don't know that's important, and they're going to share it with us. And it's going to make our appraisal assignment so much easier. They're basically going to write the appraisal for us. We're just going to craft it and put it together. And time again, that was such a formidable experience. It really contributed to, like you said, that curiosity, investigative skills. What a difference those make.
Yeah. And you've got to be personable.
Yes.
What you mentioned about going out or doing the lodging facilities, I soon learned that I need to get to the general manager. Yes. He's got the books. Yes. He's got the RevPAR. He's got the.
Yep.
He knows the occupancy.
Yes.
He's got all those numbers. You just got to get it out of them. And usually it was kind of a trade, whether it was apartments, going in, doing a survey of apartments and trying to get your apartment survey done. The competition, I soon learned that every apartment manager has their own survey. So, hey, you give me yours, I'm going to go out. I'll give you a copy of mine when I'm done. It's not confidential. It's fact.
No, I'm gathering market information. I'm just sharing it with you. That's all it is.
Yeah. So we're to approach things that way, but along the way, made some good contacts. I still believe to this day, although I'm a proponent of education, I'm still going to tell you, sometimes it's who you know, not what you know. Knowing the right person to call and asking the right questions. So it pays off time and time again.
Amen to that one. I try to, it's at times I so appreciate your reference to the babysitting thing. I mean, just that really resonates with me because there at times, thankfully we have a great culture these days, but early on, so growing a business, I didn't exactly know how to hire great people and hire the right people. And I was like, look, I think you can do this and let's make a go of it. I feel like a parent to a child. I was always preaching at them, like, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And you summed it up right there. And they're like, why do I need to do this? I'm like, you just don't know. Like, you're going to verify all the sales, and most of them probably aren't going to answer and they're not going to call you back. But you're going to get through to a couple. And one of them, just, be nice, be thoughtful, be helpful. One of them is going to know the market well. And they're literally going to walk you through some things that they're just not apparent from looking at data. And when they do, you're just going to be like, you'll feel this kind of aura just descend right into your presence. Be like, whoa. And it's like all of a sudden everything comes together. I'm like, I don't know how else to describe it. Then you just have to be there and experience that, like the right person that you're talking to that just coalesces all the data and all the trends and everything else.
You put it together very well. That's something I try to encourage my staff to do, is to talk to the players in the market and learn from them. Just get them to start talking and just listen. They can learn a wealth. And unfortunately, I think it's maybe a trait of appraisers, or I'm not sure, but some tend to be kind of introverted.
Yes.
They're not outgoing. they need to be. We have some staff members that are a little bit introverted, and we're always trying to get them out of their shell. I mean, even whether it's talking to the taxpayers or the property owners, developers, whatever it might be, they need to talk to them and learn from them. Yeah, sometimes emails are good. I get that. Conversation, like you said, you don't even know what the answers are going to be. And
Yes.
The light's going to go on.
So
You just
true.
have that aha moment.
Yes.
I go, I get it now. That's what's going on, or that's how they're looking at these properties.
Yeah, it's like, it doesn't make sense. I'm like, to you, it doesn't make sense. But let me, as they would say, the Wizard of Oz reference, let me pull back the curtain and show you this perspective. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that makes some sense.
Yeah.
And then appraising gets a little easier.
It does. It is. It's funny. USPAP, I think one of the terms in there is relevant characteristics. Yeah, but you don't know what they are yet. You figure out what unit of comparison to use. Well, you might have thought it was price per square foot, but then you talk to somebody and go, no, that's not it at all. We're looking at something completely different that impacts the value more significantly. And just because we have these stupid forms, I'm sorry, that you have to squeeze everything into sometime, or the expectation that you're going to present the data in a certain way, sometimes doesn't fit. Sometimes it's just a lot of creative writing to try to explain to your client what's happening in the market.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so it's tough, especially when you enter non-transactional markets.
Ooh, yeah.
And today's kind of like that in certain areas, certain property types, and I've run into it in the past as well. And it's, there are no comps, not current.
No, not current, yeah.
Not within a half mile in the last 3 months. So, I mean, you've got to spread your data net farther and farther.
Yes.
Either back in time or geographically. And you have to understand that there are no limits. You just have to find the relevant data.
That's such a great point, especially like you said, in those transitory markets, transaction-oriented markets, where sometimes this was one of the wonderful things I learned from a former friend and mentor's senior appraiser, Tim. To your point, Jim, he's like, Michael, sometimes your best data are actually things that have canceled and things that are still on the market, because that's the only activity that's occurring right now. And at least it's giving you guidance for what isn't. It's not just saying what is, but it's at least giving you the what isn't about the market.
Yeah.
And then,
absolutely.
Then maybe you go and piece together maybe much larger geography or much, back in time, and, maybe some market condition adjustments. He's like, it's always there. It's just how far do you have, how wide or how deep do you have to actually dig and, touch people to share some perspective.
Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, without breaking the rules of confidentiality, but if I get somebody that I trust their judgment, I'll tell, hey, this is what I'm appraising, or this is the kind of property I'm appraising.
The kind of property, this general area.
So what do you think it's worth and why?
Yeah. Well, I ask that question all the time. I'm like, look, you're the market participant. You see more properties, depending on what type of property it is. You see more properties in like a week or a month in this segment than I do.
Yeah.
And you talk to them. I mean, I talk to people. You talk to a lot of people. Give me the pulse of the market. Like, what's your immediate reaction? And it's fascinating. If they're a decent broker, a decent professional, look, they have a strong opinion and they can back it up, which is valuable.
They do. Yeah. I mean, to your point, some of the best market data you're going to get from the properties that have not sold yet.
Yes.
So collect, and now it's easier than ever, but collect all those offering memorandums or brochures, and just collect them, because that property is going to be your comp next week or a year from now.
There's sometime.
You've got the performance or whatever information's in there for development properties. They may have already put together a cost breakdown.
Yes.
Estimated from an engineer or something. I mean, just a wealth of information that can be used. And the same goes for staff reports from planning departments. If you're trying to do, now highest and best use is such a, the buzzword.
Yes.
It goes hand in hand with evaluation, but there's a wealth of information in the staff reports when they're presenting something to the planning commission or the board of supervisors, the city council. They hit so much of that data that we need as appraisers.
That's a good point.
I mean, you want to make sure it's accurate, You got to verify it, but boy, they've got some great information. I encourage anybody, if you're doing something, that you can learn so many lessons from what planning staff knows about property. It's a different perspective, but they're using the same data. They're just using it in a different way.
That is such a great way to put it about the not always well-known sources of great information.
Yeah. Well, we're no better than the data we got.
No, that's fantastic. So given that sense of no better than the data that we've got, you're with that firm for a while. How long did you stay there, and how did that develop you, and how did your career develop?
Where did we leave off? So I was at Home Fed Bank.
Yes.
And that was my first step into California. I stayed there till 1991. That coincided with, so there was a savings and loan debacle in the latter part of the 80s.
Yes.
And then there was FIREA.
Yep.
And the beginning of licensing. And all that was going on. And the bank that I was working for, as I said, they became a savings bank.
Oh, okay.
Instead of a savings and loan. What that did with this change in the banking laws, it allowed them to get into other areas of business other than the solid savings and loan. Hark back to, Jimmy Stewart.
Oh.
He was, what was the name of the Christmas movie? Anyway. Yeah. But it wasn't like that. They kind of started getting into areas that seemed profitable, but they made some bad decisions. In fact, I know that they ignored some of the warnings that I put in some of my appraisal reports or feasibility reports on proposed ventures. Frankly, may have altered some of my valuations to serve their purpose. So basically, they were San Diego based, and most of the major decisions were made by the board of directors.
Okay.
And I did have an opportunity to present to the board of directors, or basically the senior loan committee.
Yes.
A lot of times. They mostly were appreciative of the information they conveyed, but they also made some business decisions despite all the good advice they got. I started to see the writing on the wall. I think it was 1990 and then 1991. And that's when I decided I needed to get out from the bank, because they ultimately did not escape the downturn. They were one of the many financial institutions that were ultimately taken over by the RTC. So I left in 1991.
Yep.
And they were taken over by the RTC in 1992. And about that time, I was even interviewed by the FBI.
Yes.
For some of their decisions.
If anyone has been around, lending, especially to smaller institutions for any amount of time, when there's failures, there's a lot of investigations that go on, and some of those unexpected phone calls are like, Mr. Glickman, this is, agent so-and-so. You're like, agent so-and-so.
Yeah. No, it was interesting. They showed me one of my appraisals with my signature on it, and I looked at it, and then I had the original with me.
Oh,
and I said, this is not the document I signed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was, so very interesting times.
Glad you got out alive. I know some people in the profession that sadly got skinned.
Yeah, it was a tough time. And I think that's kind of one of my messages, that you can see that it's another economic downturn.
Yes.
And then another change in my career. There's a pattern. The chance that you don't want to stay so long, the door hits you on the way out. Okay.
Oh, wow.
You need to get out sooner. Okay.
Oh, my goodness. So you get out, where do you end up?
Actually, interesting. Before I left, though, I have to tell you, that was the beginning of licensing.
Yes.
That was when you had to take the licensing exams. So one of the last things that I did is I traveled around the state to their various regional offices and developed a curriculum to teach the appraisal staff how to pass the new licensing exams.
That's important.
Yeah, because you had to have, I think by January of 1993, you had to be licensed and certified to do that kind of work. And ultimately, I was fortunate enough, you remember one of the firms that I interviewed with back in 83 was Clark Wilcox.
Oh, all right.
I was fortunate enough to get an offer from them and joined up with that firm in 1991.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Yeah. At the time, one of the founders was Tom Clark. He was a great mentor. He was very active, in the Appraisal Institute, Richard Wolcott was it as well at the time. But they learned a lot from those guys. They had a great firm. We had a large staff, probably one of the largest appraisal staffs in the region at the time. But over time, people retired, and namely Tom and Richard did. The firm was purchased by Tom's daughter, Jill Clark, and another staff appraiser, Jeff Rodolfi. So they became Clark Wolcott Incorporated. Still a very well-respected firm, but over the years, it shrank and shrank until it was the three of us.
Oh my goodness! So you go from being one of the largest in the region to being just kind of normal.
Three MAIs. So we were just three MAIs, and of course along the way, I did get my MAI in 1992. Yeah. No, that was a big feat. Word of advice:
yes.
Don't procrastinate like Jim did.
Oh my gosh! You and I both know that. I don't know a person that doesn't share that same advice when it comes to this. Myself included.
My business card was just going to say professional candidate on it.
I love that, professional candidate.
Because I was never going to get the MAI. It took me so long that some of the classes I had originally taken expired, and I had to challenge the exams again after 10 years to get the credit so I could sit for the comprehensive. So, and my demo report, I think it was a 5-year limit. By the time the data value or when you submitted or said, hey, I'm going to do it, and turn it in. And I literally went to FedEx, one day before the deadline in that 5th year to get it in. So I work better under pressure.
A lot of people do, Jim. A lot of people do.
Yeah. But anyway, my time at Clark Wolcott, nearly 20 years.
Oh, that's impressive.
Became somewhat of a boutique appraisal firm, but its reputation preceded it. I think we did our best to elevate it, if not keep it at the same level. Great experience. Continued doing work for private parties. We did a lot of work for local jurisdictions, government agencies, and of course lenders. Lenders tended to be my main source just because of my background. It just kind of went that way. Although along the way we have a way of financing infrastructure in California with improvement bonds and community facilities district bonds. So they're basically land secured financing. So I developed an expertise in that, and Clark Wolcott and their reputation kind of opened that door for me. But that became one of my areas of expertise.
That's impressive.
And did a lot of those districts, which basically you're taking a whole planned community, trying to figure out what it's worth, so they can secure financing, and then it's tied to it finances the infrastructure for the land development. So, and then of course, subsequent homes and other businesses and other property types. So that was really interesting.
That is. For people that are not in California or don't know about the infrastructure bonds and this form of funding for these type of projects, give a sense of an assignment in the scope and the type of professional work that you're called upon to do. Obviously, valuation, but there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, your client is really a finance team.
Yes.
So usually the jurisdiction it's located is going to be the issuer of the bonds. It's going to be secured by the land, but they'll have the Department of Finance. They will hire bond counsels because they're going to literally sell the bonds that finance this work from investors. Mm-hmm. It's a good coupon clipper if it's a good bond. But so you're dealing with the city or county finance department. It could be dealing with their utilities department. You'll deal with, again, the bond counsel. Part of that finance committee, or at least representative, will be the developer, because they're going to be source of a lot of the information, or developers if there's more than one developer within the defined district. So the district will be, usually it's the boundaries of a master planned community, if you will, and usually primary residential in nature. Not always, but primarily residential. What they do is they sell the bonds, and it's pretty much just structured like a mortgage. It's got a 30-year debt schedule. The form of payment is collected through a special tax. So, and they will set a tax rate for each type of property. So each residential lot of a certain size will be, say, $1,000 a year. And that $1,000 a year will get placed on to the tax bill, your regular tax bill, as what they call a direct levy. So it's not an ad valorem tax. It's not a relationship between the value of the property. It's literally going to be that other, what we call in California, direct levy or a special assessment that's tacked onto your tax bill. So really, who's paying for the bonds?
It's the homeowners.
Are the homeowners. Yeah. And so, but they're not going to issue this financing without the appraisal. And the appraisal, of course, you're doing a very expanded market survey, and it's pretty much a feasibility survey. You're providing them with information, so they have to look at the value of the finished home. What would be the value of the typical finished home? They look at a ratio of that special tax added on to the ad valorem tax bill, so they don't want that to exceed 2%. And they usually target about 1.5 to 1.6% as the maximum, because values can fluctuate up and down. They have some targets that they need to meet to make it, feasible to go forward with the bond districts. So the appraiser is integral to this, because your appraisal, the full appraisal, or at least an executive summary of your appraisal, will be attached to the back of the official offering of the bonds. And it becomes public information, which is great. So if you're an appraiser and you are subsequently doing work over there, you want to go get a copy of the official statement for the bond, because attached to it is information on the subject property, which the subject property is all of the district. But if you're doing one property or a portion of it, it's another great source of data, because basically, unfortunately, if you're not the appraiser, your competitor just prepared an incredible appraisal that's full of all kinds of data for you. And now it's public information. But you have to understand, you got to be willing to do that kind of work and have your report out there for public scrutiny. So it is a niche, but it does not go without liability.
Way to put it.
And responsibility. So yeah, it's not for the faint of heart, because as I said, a lot of appraisers just go under the radar, just do my appraisals. I don't want any attention. Just do my appraisals, collect my fees, and just do my business. So it is a different area. Those assignments can take a year.
Wow. I didn't realize they took that. I knew that, not from experience, but from being around those that have done this. I knew there was a duration to it. I did not realize it was that long.
Yeah, because you get engaged early. I hate to tell you, a lot of people don't like to write drafts, but you will produce a draft, even if it's just the market description and that type of thing, because they use that information. You don't necessarily have your final value conclusions. You're not going to sway from your opinion.
Yes.
But you are part of a finance team. I guess that's a good segue into the next change in my career.
Yeah.
And then I was working on one of those assignments in 2007. It was a man-made lake community, homes around it with views on the lake, that type of thing. And it was a pretty large development. And I came back with my initial findings on the market. And when the charts start showing the median values headed down, the bells started to go off. And this was prior to the implosion on Wall Street. This was in 2007. And this was the first sign. And it's that they said, okay, based on your findings, we're going to kill this. We're not going to be offering the bonds. We're not going to go forward with a bond. I think then shortly thereafter, then the housing market imploded.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, and again, it peaked in 2005, but the real signs did not really become obvious until about 2007. Yeah, and so that was the first sign that things were turning. And so as moving forward from that year, by the time I got to 2009, and most of the appraisals were on workouts and properties that were on the watch list, but even those were starting to run out. And, foreclosures, business activity was down. And if, again, just like today, if you're dependent on the lending side of things for a living, and this was not your bank. This was lending in the larger arena of bond financing. Everything came to a halt. And all those types of clients, which I kind of was doing work with in one shape or form, were gone. And it was time, okay, now I need to reinvent myself. And of course, diversify your business, get into other areas. That was the time, 2009, when I started looking for something else. And I think we talked earlier about, there are some pitfalls to working, for private clients, and we won't go into details, but that's a choice you need to make. And while it's all good advice, you've got to run a business, and you've got to be self-aware of what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, or what the weaknesses are in the business climate that you intend to compete in. I did start to look for institutional or government jobs as well. And at that time, I think I put my first application in for an appraisal position at the County of Sacramento at the assessor's office. And that was in very early part of 2010. I think by August, I got the invitation for an interview. I did interview. I was going for what they call a supervisor appraiser position. They wisely did not hire me and gave it to, because it's really most suited for an internal candidate that knows the operations of the office. So I learned that. I actually interviewed, wasn't successful. Subsequently, I had conversations with one of the chief appraisers, and they had said, you should just apply for the position right below it. So kind of had, took a step back. To me, it would be as far as salary. But I think when you step back and look at the benefit package that you get working with a government agency, and you look at the steady paycheck.
Did you say steady paycheck?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. In times like these,
sorry.
It just
is that a slap in the face? I'm sorry.
Not at all. That just sounds like a warm chocolate chip cookie with some walnut in there and some milk to go along with it. That just sounds yummy.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it takes a little stress off of you. You're still going to work hard, but it's nice to know. It's nice to know that the check will be coming in as long as you do your job.
Yes.
I've been very fortunate. So, at the time, I joked, I went to the dark side. I didn't. In fact, I wish I had done it sooner in my career. And maybe it's just at the County of Sacramento, at the assessor's office, it's a unique situation, but they have a great team, great management team, great people. Yeah. And I've been very fortunate. So I joined them finally in December 2010. And then I started as a senior appraiser. As luck would have it, one of the chief appraisers, actually the one that gave me the advice, unbeknownst to me, they were going to retire shortly. So they retired. There's upward movement. And so my supervisor moved up to chief, Larry Gross, great guy. And then I was successful to promote up into his position as supervisor. Basically, we would divide up the office into residential and commercial.
Yes.
And we have probably about 35 to 40 appraisers on each of the residential and commercial divisions.
Yes.
And then there's a chief that oversees each division. And then under that, we'll break it up into geographic areas that we call crews of appraisers. So I was a supervisor of one of those crews.
Yes.
And that crew also was kind of, if you got promoted or got hired to work on the commercial side where I was, then that was kind of the training ground. So
I see.
I was involved in training the appraisers, educating them the ins and outs of commercial appraising, most of them coming from residential.
Of course. Yeah.
That was great, very rewarding, and it has been. So did that for several years, and then fortunate enough to promote up to residential chief in 2016.
Oh, congratulations. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, as you've touched on, is it's about, whether you're comfortable with it or not, actually talking to people. And talking to people reveals things such as, hey, this is not the position for you, but that one might be. And, also having persistence and patience as you've demonstrated and being able to contribute as you've done previously when you went around the state of California and helped the bank staff appraisers become competent to actually pass the exams. What have you observed as a chief appraiser on the assessing side? Because a lot of people may have some experience around assessments because maybe they do property tax assessment appraisals, but they haven't been on the assessor side of the equation. What do you know now that you did not know before you joined?
As a private appraiser, we've got USFAP and we've got those kind of laws and regulations. So a lot of us are influenced by banking regulations. Yes. There's a whole different set of rules, regulations, and laws that pertain to tax assessment.
Wow.
And you've got to become a student of that. It's not easy. It's challenging. There's a lot of information
Yes.
to absorb, and you have to understand the consequences of the decisions you make on your valuation and what that's going to trigger as far as a tax assessment.
Got it.
And what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, and when you're allowed to do it. And we're always keeping up with legislation. I got a packet on my desk that here's a whole new set of legislation that is going to impact our work.
Lovely.
We have to understand it.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a different world. But so I guess your client is the assessor, first of all, person in the corner office. That's your client now. It's not the bank or, whoever's, paying. That's your client. We're overseen in California with the Board of Equalization, a state agency. So we get guidance from them and tell us, what we can and can't do, or at least they give you, again, guidance, just like USFAP is guidance. It's not law, but some of it is law, and they help you interpret it. So it's a different world in that respect. But at the bottom line, we're appraisers.
Yes.
And we're using the same market data, we're using the same skills, and we're just applying it in a different way. And I think what's really, really funny is when we've gotten our appraisers to confirm sales or whatever information it is, construction costs. We make them want to do that so they can learn from the people they're talking to and make sure it's accurate.
Yes.
What's the funny reaction is a lot of people are just under the impression, well, if I paid that for the property, that's what's going to go on the tax bill. And I go, well, no, we can actually override your purchase price because we're going to value it. We're going to value it. So if your price that you pay, the consideration you pay, does not equate or close to market, we're going to enroll for assessment purposes something else. And that's the key, is that we're doing appraisals for tax assessment purposes. Yeah, and we're going to enroll value, not what you paid necessarily.
That's a wild concept that people definitely struggle with because they're not experienced in the ins and outs of mass appraisal, and as you touched on, all the different jurisdictional responsibilities you have that exceed USPAP because of the role and all essentially the constituents that you represent.
Yeah, and we have to be, and that's part of it, is you have to be able to interact with the public, whether it's the taxpayers or other third parties that come in asking information. So that's part of it. We develop our appraisers so they can competently interact with taxpayers and the public, that they can educate them on all these laws and regulations that seemingly, that everybody has a certain impression of things. And then we have to explain, well, here's how it really works. And it takes a while because some people are steadfast believing that, well, I'm the taxpayer and I'm right, and these are my rights. And I go, yeah, you're right. You have the rights, but we are constrained by laws and regulations, and our hands are tied. But it does tie into, we get involved with tax appeals. So people do appeal their taxes. And so, that's an area for fee appraisers to get involved in assessment disputes, and whether it's a formal tax appeal or otherwise. What's funny, the year right before I came to the assessor's office, I actually had 2 assignments at a fee appraiser that put me in direct contact and opposed, if you will, to the office itself. I was representing the taxpayer, and one I was representing a tax agent, from a different perspective. But I ended up having to work with them, and then, flip the script. A year later, I'm working side by side with the people that were across the table from me. In one instance, I was the supervisor of the one guy that I was going against. So yeah, things can change. So I acted professionally because you just never know where you're going to end up next or who you're going to be dealing with. So treat everybody fairly, even if they work for that government agency.
They're professionals too.
They're professionals too. They're just
professionals too. I love that.
Yeah. So
that's great.
Yeah. So it's been a great experience. I've been exposed at the assessors of all kinds of things. Was able to go to some international conferences around the country. We actually ended up hosting in Sacramento an international conference of the IAAO, which is what is that? International Association of Assessment Officers. So I got very involved in that. Actually, was one of the presenters. So really got exposed to a lot. Part of that got exposed to a lot of the GIS tools that are out there.
Of course.
Yeah. And of course they target government agencies, but as appraisers, whether you're government or fee, we're always using these GIS tools. I mean, Google Maps, S3 has all kinds of products out there. So I've really become a student of that stuff. And that's been kind of one of my pet projects, developing internal GIS tools for our staff using our data. We have a wealth of data. We just need to capture it better. And for those that don't understand, GIS is basically it's Geographic Information System, and it helps you visualize data.
Yes.
Whether it's where all the Starbucks are, or where your comps are, or what have you. So we've developed some internal tools.
Yeah.
We're using GIS data, which has been incredible. So that's been you get exposed to a lot of things. So it's just not, one of my, I guess my missions as chief has just been to not only educate my staff, but to give them the best tools they can have to do their jobs well, whether it's data or GIS. We have some and other software that we invest in to just help them do their jobs better. We're not trying to replace them.
I mean, Jim, given all that you've experienced and all you've been exposed to, I mean, local, regional, national travel, all these different property types, the role you're in now, what, as you look out over the next 3 to 5 years, what has you optimistic, or what are you looking forward to?
Okay, well, for the industry or for myself?
Well, why don't you go for yourself first, because this is about you, Jim, and then you may choose to expand a little bit.
Funny you would ask that. So I have scheduled my retirement for almost like a year from today.
All right. Well, hey, congratulations a year early. I'll have to put that in the
thank you. Yeah. So at least my full-time job. So my, basically what I look forward to the next year is making sure that my staff knows how to do everything I know how to do, which is, so I just want to be sure that I leave them in good hands when I depart the assessor's office next year. I'm, like my dad before me, I'm a teacher. And so, what I look forward to beyond retirement, I'm going to continue to teach. I don't think I mentioned, but I teach at a local community college, just like my original mentor, Preston Bank, did. I now teach that class at the community college.
Oh, I love that. Talk about paying it forward.
Yeah. So I've been doing that about 20 years, and that's really rewarding. So the best person to teach an appraisal class at a community college is an appraiser.
Yes. Absolutely. A practicing professional is the way to go.
Right. Yeah. But unfortunately, I won't be practicing. So that's going to,
at some point, though. I mean, you practice.
Yeah. So I do kind of question my relevance going forward, but hopefully I've got something to share. But I would, for anybody else, it's a very rewarding thing. It's, you're not going to get rich over it, but, but you're developing the next round of appraisers, get people interested in the profession. If you have your own business, it's great recruiting. I mean, frankly, you can zero out on that best student. That might be your next best person.
That's your next best hire.
Yeah. And we actually use it internally at the assessor's office, where a lot of our clerical people that are not yet appraisers want to become appraisers. They take my class to prepare for interviews and understand better what they're doing and how it impacts value of property. So, but also, as I said, we can identify outside people that we might want to hire. So it's great, and it can be a great source of referrals for appraisers. Your students, because I mean, at a community college, you've got kids out of college, kids out of high school.
Yes.
In college, trying to get maybe a certificate or a degree in real estate related or finance. But you would also have some pretty savvy investors in there that are taking a class. and they may end up being your next best client. So it's very rewarding. And as far as that, I will continue to do that. Probably going to apply to the Appraisal Institute to become a mentor for the PREA program.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd mentioned Greg Harding earlier, and I did want to mention him again. Greg was my boss at Home Fed.
Mm-hmm.
Greg went on to work for Bureau of Real Estate Appraisers here in California.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
As an investigator.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, he went independent, and he's always served the appraisal community.
Yes.
Actually became a director on the AQB.
Oh, all right.
For the foundation. And he actually was one of the original proponents of this PREA program.
Oh, okay.
Which is, practical applications in real estate appraisal, where you can gain experience by taking a case study class.
Got it.
So hopefully I'll get involved in that. But, the fact that I'm getting involved in all these things, I'm going to maintain my interest in GIS.
Yes.
I'm probably going to I bought a drone a couple of years ago.
Okay.
I want to learn more about that.
Yeah.
Heck, I might, get better at that, get my FAA certification.
Yeah.
And then offer my services to the real estate community as a drone photographer.
Love that.
And do that. My stepson actually does it already. So he's going to teach me a few things.
Nice.
So, but I would just say, looking at the future, the business is changing.
Yeah.
You got to look for opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's in education or technology.
Yes.
Or whatever tools are needed. And just, you got to recognize where things are going.
Yep.
Obviously, that's any good business plan.
Yeah, that's true.
Individual or business is, having the foresight to figure out where things are going and see them before anybody else does and act on it.
Yes.
So
that's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not going to learn that if you don't network, if you're not going to association meetings or going out to lunch with somebody or just getting on the phone and talking with people and try to start to get insight into what's happening next. Our profession as appraisers is changing.
Yes.
But I think the basic principles are the same, no matter what the government tells us what we can or cannot say.
No, that's true.
What words we're going to use to
no,
say.
That's true. That's true. That was a great post by George Dell.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Agree with
yeah.
That
well,
reference you just made. I'm reading that.
God, it's really sad. I mean, I don't want to discourage anybody, but yeah.
No, we're not going to go down there. But that'll be our we have follow-up podcasts scheduled, like some snippets, and that'll be a good one.
But if you work hard and you're smart, and again you got that good investigative nature to you, you can be successful in this business. And I don't intend to stop being involved. Probably just not every hour of every day.
Of course. Love that. I love that. Well, Jim, thank you so much for this time. This has been so informative. There's so much to learn and take away. I think y'all should listen to it a second time as soon as you finish the first time. So that's how much value there is. And before you hit the replay button or play it again, make sure not only that you've already now liked this, but who's someone else that comes to mind? You're like, wow, that was fascinating. Jim talking about those infrastructure bonds. Like, oh man, somebody else comes to mind. Like, oh my goodness, this whole assessment side of things. There's a lot of people that that could really get some value out of this. Or even as Jim touched on, there's a lot of untapped potential out there for people that have that sense of curiosity and have an investigative approach towards things in a friendly, congenial, if you will, kind of manner. So congenial is the word I was looking for. So with that, we're going to bring this podcast episode to a close. I just want to say, Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
You're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.